welcome back to my channel, Beautiful Minutia. If you're new here, my name is Tiffany, and welcome to the last of the 12 days of Christmas. It's always so much fun to be able to talk with you guys about my plans for the new year, things I've loved about the previous year, and then usually just some fun videos that some of you have suggested along the way tucked in there too. Today is one of those videos, and today I'm going to be reading 1-star reviews from some of my favorite books of the year. I think I actually did this video last year at one point too. Let me tell you, some of these reviews out here are brutal. So I'm specifically looking for ones that are more funny. I'm not gonna have these big long reviews that are like 6 paragraphs long, but I do think it's fun to look about things that like people didn't enjoy about books that I did enjoy, or books that I hated. I like to read like the good reviews too, and just kind of get a more well-rounded view on what other people think about books besides just myself. So without further ado, let's get into it. We are going to start with Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. This book has a 4.22 overall rating on Goodreads, which is quite high with 342,000 ratings and 53,000 reviews. It looks like only 1% of the reviews are 1-star ratings, with around 3,400 1-star ratings. This one says, I rarely write bad reviews, but this is one of the most boring and repetitive books I've ever read. Halls, vestibules, statues, albatross, halls, vestibules, statues, albatross, and blah, blah, blah. So boring, tedious, and overhyped. This is the kind of book that puts me in a slump. I didn't find it that repetitive because it's such a short book. It doesn't take that long before we start getting into some of the more mysterious elements. This one's wonderful. I can't help it. I need a plot or something I can hold on to. It slipped through my fingers into the 43rd vestibule to the right of a statue covered in seaweed. LOL. It's a perfectly petty review. Reading this book felt exactly like listening to someone tell you in excruciating detail all about the crazy dream they had last night. Poorly structured, grasping at meaning unsuccessfully, and just so uninteresting. I can actually see where this would feel like someone telling you a crazy dream they had in excruciating detail, because the beginning really feels like absolutely bizarre. I guess as a whole, the story has a lot of really bizarre elements, but I didn't think it was uninteresting, and I thought it had a really great meaning, but I can see where this would feel like a really weird dream. This just says no. Okay, we have two kind of contrasting reviews here that are both 1 stars, and that this one says, I can't for the life of me see why this book has attracted such attention. It's almost comically bad. The writing is dully pedestrian, failing to bring alive the spaces of the house in which Piranesi finds himself or the few characters that wander through its halls. Then this one says, just know, this book felt like more of a draft of random ideas than a finished work. Horribly organized. I pushed myself to try and receive these words with a more surrealistic and open mind, but I failed. The incoherent sentences full of empty descriptions were exhausting. So there's one that's saying like, the halls don't come alive because there's not enough description, and then another one saying that there were so many descriptions that it felt exhausting. I thought the description in this book was excellent and really made it feel like very moody and atmospheric, and it's really funny how a description can feel completely like empty and devoid of life to one person, like totally sets the stage for another, being me, because even when things felt incoherent and I just felt confused, which is the beginning of this book, I was still there for the atmosphere. I still enjoyed the atmosphere even when I was like very confused and had no idea what was going on or where we were going with this. Okay, next up we are going to do My Antonia by Willa Cather. This has a lower rating overall, so 3.83 stars on Goodreads with 141,000 ratings and 9,500 reviews. Of those ratings, 3% are 1 star. These are kind of painful. Okay, I have a joke for you. How many pages does it take to adequately describe red wheat swaying ever so gently in the prairie breeze? Give up? According to Willa Cather, it takes at least 9. I say at least because I'm not sure if I finished reading it or if I threw the book at the wall, because who gives a crap about red wheat? Yeah, I'm sure it's a beautiful look at prairie life or whatever the heck it was that they lived, but if I wanted that, I'd watch old reruns of Little House on the Prairie on the Hallmark Channel, which, believe me, I have. I once tried watching the film version of My Antonia starring little Neil Patrick Harris, but even that was mostly excruciating. Final verdict, best use is kindling. Again, this is one of those things where I just absolutely loved the nature descriptions. I was here for the descriptions, but apparently this person absolutely was not. I had to read this book in 9th grade and so thoroughly hated it that I later blamed it for my subsequent years of disinterest in literature. Having given it another shot after 20 years of further wisdom and maturity, I can now say that I still strongly dislike this book because it is so terribly boring. That's so sad that this was like the reason why they consider themselves disinterested in literature. It is very slow paced, I'll give them that, and I could see how this could be a boring book for a high schooler, but I thought that it was like really meaningfully done. Even though it is very episodic towards the beginning, you see it all come together in the end in a way that I thought was meaningful. Do I get to count this if I only read the Spark Notes? Doesn't matter. It's still dreadful. You absolutely do not get to count a book as a 1-star review if you only read the Spark Notes. I think this was the only book I ever hated. How many pages of descriptions of grass waving on the prairie does one person need to read, for God's sake? Of course, perhaps as punishment for hating this great work of literature, I was sentenced to 3 years in North Dakota years later. So I guess people's biggest complaint about this is that it has too many descriptions of the prairie. That's the theme I'm seeing here. Okay, moving on to Kristin Lavransdatter. I am looking on Goodreads at the edition that I have that includes books 1, 2, and 3 all in one volume. This actually is the highest rated one I've had so far, and that it's 4.31 stars. It only has 13,000 ratings and 1,700 reviews. So my guess is that maybe people either rate this book individually on the individual books, or maybe that it's just not as widely read as some of the other books that I have on this list. Looks like 1% of the ratings are 1 star, and that's only 151 of the ratings. Had high hopes for this book, but couldn't take any more of it. As a fan of such historical series as Vikings and Last Kingdom, I thought this might be an adventurous historical fiction into the world of medieval Norway. It started out interesting enough and seemed quite insightful into the culture and lifestyle of that location and era. However, before long, it was all heaving breasts and dashing dark-haired knights and vows upon our eternal souls to make our illicit affair legit. Ick. It turns into a well-researched romance novel. Not for me. Couldn't take any more, so I returned it. Fans of the Bronte sisters or Jane Austen will probably love this, though. Well, I am a fan of both the Bronte sisters and Jane Austen, so that's accurate. I would not call this a romance novel, though I guess there is some romance in it because so much of the romance is infused with toxicity. And so as a result, it feels much more like a cautionary tale or the long-lasting effects of sin than it does actually romantic. But I think the same thing is true of Wuthering Heights. If someone's going into this expecting something similar to Vikings, then they will definitely be disappointed because this is totally different in setting and in tone. I can't say it was the worst book I ever read, but it was mostly torture. Torture that I committed to finishing. I suppose I can say this book is about choices and consequences in life, mostly disappointing and frustrating. Perhaps it focused too much on what we endure and much too less on the joys and beauty of life. I would rather pay attention to and focus on the latter. So that's actually true, because there's so much regret and sorrow in this book that as a result, there is definitely less focus on joy. Unmatched storytelling. Hated the character. So if you thought the storytelling was so amazing, but that the character work was just someone you didn't enjoy, you still give it 1 star? It doesn't even get like 2 or 3 stars because you think the storytelling is unmatched? Dreadfully dull. I just couldn't make it through the awful writing. That's the first time I've ever heard anyone say that about Kristin Lavransdatter, because most people talk about how the writing is really beautiful, but maybe they felt like it was too bloated or too plotting, it moved too slowly, it was too depressing. Like those are all things I hear all the time, but I don't think I've ever heard anyone say that the writing itself was dreadful. Unrelatable storylines, stupid people, stupid woman not bothering to grow up. Not a voracious child in my mind after all those children. Is that supposed to say precious? Is it supposed to say, I don't know what that, or is that a word? It is not a word. I feel like maybe it was supposed to be precious. I mean, I just, stupid people, stupid woman. Is there anything else you think is stupid? Next, we're going to do What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher. This is a horror that is a retelling of Edgar Allan Poe's Fall of the House of Usher. And surprisingly, even though it actually has like a Goodreads Choice Award, the overall rating is 3.88, which is not horrific by any means, but I thought that this book would have like around a 4-star, like 4-star or above rating. It looks like it has 97,000 ratings and around 16,000 reviews. Out of those ratings, 1% is 1-star ratings with a little over 1,000 1-stars. I listened to the audiobook and wow, oh wow, is the narration horrendous. Truly terrible. I don't understand what Shakespeare summer camp this narrator went to, but keep it in the scrapbook. I want to say more, but on the off chance the narrator sees this, I will politely end it here. I guess this is evidence of how a narrator can make or break a book, but it also feels kind of unfair to give an entire book 1 star just because you didn't like the narrator. I didn't listen to this on audiobook. I read it on my Kindle, so I don't know who the narrator was or if I would agree with that assessment, but there are definitely books that I've stopped reading or listening to on audio because the narrator was so bad. So I guess that's relatable. I mean, I know Edgar Allan Poe married his 13-year-old cousin and all, but what did he do to deserve this? This book made me want to go back to all my other 1-star reviews and bump them up a star in order to create a rating system that more truly captured my dislike for this book. That's some pretty intense dislike. I feel like this book so far has like the best, like really petty reviews. Some of these are so good, but they're also spoilery. So I don't really want to share them in case you're watching this just for the vibes, but like you have not read it, but I am going to include this one that merely says fan fiction about fungus. There is so much about mushrooms, even in the very first chapter of this book. And I just, if you've read the book, it's even funnier, but man, some really, really excellent 1-star reviews on this one. Okay, I'm fully anticipating all of the reviews of this one just saying, it was boring and it was too long, and that's Daniel Deronda. Overall on Goodreads, this has a rating of 3.86, and there are only 26,000 ratings and 1,400 reviews. 2% of those ratings are 1-star ratings. So I feel like this is one of those books where it's like, this is not going to be, for most people, the first George Eliot that you pick up. Like, it's probably going to be Middlemarch is more well known, and then like Silas Marner is shorter. I don't feel like Daniel Deronda is typically going to be the primary thing that people pick up. But I guess we'll see if some of these are initial reviews, but I'm fully expecting people to say that they just thought it was kind of boring and long or something like that. So first one, never finished it, rather boring. The only interesting character was Gwendolyn. Okay, I find this one actually kind of interesting. DNF'd at 40%. Mrs. Torrington was sure she would never sleep in her bed if she lived among blacks. I've loved Silas Marner, The Mill on the Floss, and Middlemarch. My reading of Eliot stops here. The same thing happened for me as I worked my way through Dickens. I choose what I read, and there are far too many classics that don't include discussions that are racist or stereotypically racist characters. So I find this interesting because I do think that a lot of classics do have racist content in it. And if you're going to read classics, I think that it is mostly unavoidable to not encounter books that have racism in them. And I don't know very many classic books I've read that don't have maybe some degree of that, because we've definitely learned and grown as a society in general. But I also find it really interesting because part of the reason behind Daniel Deronda is that George Eliot was trying to portray Jewish people in a more positive light, which is something that never happens in Victorian classics. I think this is the only Victorian classic that I've read that is purposely supposed to show Jewish people as just like real people, regular people, good people. And so it's interesting that this was DNF'd because they didn't like how stereotypically racist it was, because there are some characters that actually grow in this throughout the book and come to the point where they realize that they have been racist and that they need to stop the way that they are, like this, that the assumptions and stereotypes that they made about people is absolutely not true. And so I felt like this book had a much more nuanced and interesting conversation surrounding racism. That doesn't mean that there weren't still some, probably, like, I don't remember this sentence at all, but that doesn't mean that like this particular situation got resolved. But I do think it's interesting, because I think that engaging with works of the past, you're going to find things that are not the way that you should think. And I think that in the future, there will be people who read books from our time period that find things incredibly offensive. This is a marvelously sarcastic review. So glad this was so long. Really enjoyed every second. Felt so elated. I was recommended this book by someone who told me I'd love it because Gwendolyn was a lot like Scarlett O'Hara, a personal hero, and in my opinion, the single best female character that has ever been written. That person is now cut out of my life forever because how dare they? Gwen wishes. Gwen could never. Should they ever be in a room together, Gwen would burst into flames before Scarlett finished saying, fiddle-dee-dee. First of all, I'm kind of concerned that anyone would see Scarlett O'Hara as a personal hero, because I don't think that she is maybe intended to be likable. I hope she's not intended to be likable, because I think she is the most selfish, horrible character potentially in all of literature, which is also a very strong statement. But, you know, you can take unlikable characters and still have it be like a good book. And I think that Gwendolyn is quite unlikable for most of this book, but I'm more concerned about the fact that someone said Scarlett O'Hara was a hero of theirs. Okay, the last book that I'm going to do is Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan. It has a 4.16 overall rating on Goodreads with 252,000 ratings and 30,000 reviews. Of those, less than 1% is a 1-star rating with 1,300 of them. So this is probably like the one with the least 1-star rating so far. So I don't know if we're actually going to have very interesting reviews here or not. We'll see. I don't know what to say except, what was that? Why are books that are highly recommended always so disappointing? At first, I rated this 4 stars, but then I thought more about the Magdalene Laundries, which I admittedly knew nothing about, and the poor women and babies, and then the story didn't sit with me the same way. I appreciate the story and the message, but I think I ultimately resented that the man and his struggles were the center of the story and he, the hero, while the women and their journeys were an afterthought. I get that the book was specifically told from his viewpoint, but for all the things I appreciated about it, it didn't sit right for me. Unpopular opinion. So first of all, dropping a book from 4 stars to 1 star is like quite a leap. But I would actually argue that while the Magdalene Laundries, which is something I didn't know anything about historically going into this book, I would argue that that is not the point of the book at all. The point of the book is like what it takes to do the right thing when no one else is, and kind of reflecting on your own life and the way people have treated you and how that might impact how you treat other people in the future. I can understand wishing that this had been more about the Magdalene Laundries, because I was fascinated by that and did a lot of research after reading this book. And I actually said in the reading vlog where I talked about this book that a lot of other people would have taken this same story and made it into a 3, 4, maybe even 500-page historical fiction that focused way more on the history of the Magdalene Laundries, on the more sensational elements, which I would say that's the more sensational part of this book, because it's a really quiet book overall, and it's about one man's journey more than it's about the historical setting. Did not like this. Cold. Characters you have no reason to feel anything about. Nothing happens. Not a fan. I'm just kind of like, nothing happened? Did we read the same book? There were definitely things that happened, but again, this is a book where it's kind of left open at the end and you don't know like the fallout and the progression of what's going to happen after some decisions that are made at the very end of the book. But again, that's not the point. The point isn't the fallout. The point is the journey. And I can see why people who might want a more straightforward plot or a more definitive ending really would not jive with this book. There's actually quite a few more reviews that are basically just talking about how like, this isn't an ending, I want to know what happened next. So there's a lot of other people who felt that same way. This one is like the sweetest 1-star review I've ever read. I think I'm just a hater. A whole bunch of broken heart emojis. Not my style of book, to be honest, and I felt like nothing really pulled me in. So sorry to this super nice cashier at Barnes & Noble who told me I would love this book. That's just like such a sweet, like, I hate this book, but I think I'm just a hater, and I'm so sorry to the person who recommended this to me. Well, I think I'm gonna wrap this up here, but those were some 1-star reviews of some of my favorite books that I read this year. Like I said, it's always fun to see, like, there were some reviews that were really legitimate, but a lot of them were so long, and I don't want to read you paragraphs and paragraphs or read you reviews that were really spoilery. I think that the books that were more recently published were the ones that had more funny reviews, or books that people had to read in school because then they're almost like embittered over the fact that they were forced to read this book. And so I love the petty reviews. I think that they're so funny. Thank you so much for joining me for all of the 12 days of Christmas. And thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please hit like and also subscribe so you can continue to see more bookish content from me, and I will see you again next time.